So
let's get started.
I'm sure we're going to have people join us, but for those of you who were very prompt, thank you so much for joining us on the Bridge Club tonight. We are really, really excited to have Stephen Cital join us for this really fun conversation. Number one, I mean, you're a blast to talk with anyway, and this is a really important conversation. So combine those two things together, and I think there are going to be a lot of people who wish they had been here in person with the video. So some of you are new to the Bridge Club, so real quick. The Bridge Club is something Catherine Haskins. Catherine, wave your little hand. Hello, Catherine.
I'm right here. Can you not see me? Wait, you're freezing. I froze.
No.
Did you freeze? Oh.
No, I don't think so. Anyway, okay, here we go. Anyway, Catherine and I started this about a year ago because we really have a passion to connect people together across the veterinary profession over topics that we really believe are relevant to everyone in veterinary medicine, whether you are in practice or if you are in academia or if you work for a pharmaceutical company. We just really believe in connecting those bridges. So we try to get people, our thing is connect, engage, learn, and grow. So we hope that this evening here with us that you will maybe make some new connections you wouldn't have otherwise, engage with us in conversation, learn something new, and then, you know, grow a little bit as a professional and also as a person in reaching out to other people. So please feel free to ask questions. I know Stephen's going to have a couple of points where he, you know, gives us the opportunity. There's plenty of time at the end to ask questions as well. So with that, I just have to real quickly say too, so we actually first started talking to Stephen about cannabis, and we all know he's an expert in that particular area, but we had such a fabulous conversation talking about the importance of opioids and opioid diversion. So we decided to bring this conversation forward first and foremost. So without further ado, Stephen, would love to have you kick off our conversation with our traditional toast.
Oh, your glass is ready.
Oh my gosh. That dog was trying to toast for me. That's exciting. Thank you so much for having me. And I have my, this is what we call a real cocktail glass. This is vintage, right?
Love it.
I grew up with those.
Yeah. Love them, bringing them back. And my toast today is to the people that the opioid crisis has affected, whether that's in practice, whether that's a family member or a friend with a lost life, or a person that's struggling with addiction. This toast is to those staff members that are caught in the awkward, painful, scary situations of maybe being the addict themselves or knowing that there's somebody in the hospital that needs some help. So hopefully this will be some guidance, and hopefully we can all get the help that we all need in all of our different own ways. So cheers.
Cheers to that.
Right. With that in mind, take it away.
All right, so I think we're all aware that the opioid crisis in the United States has hit veterinary medicine particularly hard. And it's hit us hard because we're not able to get the medications that we necessarily are used to getting for certain procedures or patients that might be really, really painful. And we have always been taught, and I think it's still the gold standard to use, in particular, injectable opioids as a gold standard pain medication for patients, whether it's for surgery, trauma, even sedation. And this opioid crisis has affected us because of two things, well, three things. One, we've had Mother Nature that has gone and demolished and ruined some of these plants where we actually get some of these opioids. Then we had federal mandate after the continuing addictions and overdoses of our human patients and community members overdosing from oral narcotics, injectable narcotics. So the federal mandate was to decrease opioid production by 25-30% each year, which is pretty damning, especially when it comes to us in the veterinary profession, because humans are always going to take precedence when it comes to getting these medications and these medical supplies, right? So we have us as a veterinary community impacted by that. And then we've just had this struggle within our own community, this kind of silent thing that we've never talked about addiction and potential abuse in clinic, and how that's affected us. And what's interesting is when I go into hospitals and I do trainings on anesthesia or pain management, I always ask for a list of drugs that the hospital has. And there's all too often that hospital that doesn't have what I would consider a robust number or variety of opioids in the clinic. And when I ask, oh, is this because of the opioid crisis, you're not able to get these particular drugs anymore? And oftentimes that's actually not the case. That the answers that I'm getting are, we've had problems with staff in the past taking our C2 opioid drugs and using them for themselves, and we've decided not to carry anything higher than, or anything more potent than something like buprenorphine or butorphanol in clinic. And what's interesting is when we look at some of the earlier studies with opioid abuse for veterinarians specifically, we see butorphanol as actually one of those more common opioids being abused in clinic, which is kind of interesting. So it's kind of this silent thing that I don't think we've really talked about in veterinary medicine very much, and I wanted to address it. So signs of diversion, there's two parts of this. There's the staff side of things, the technicians, the assistants, the veterinarians, maybe even the office staff. And then we also have the clients that are potentially diverting oral narcotics as well from their patients and from the hospital. So when we think about the staff and we were looking for signs of diversion, these are kind of the four most common things that we will see in clinic. So number one, and I think the easiest to really see, which can also be difficult to assess if there's real diversion going on, is the drug log balances being off. And you know, that's pretty easy because we often see these big errors where, like, okay, this hydromorphone bottle is supposed to have 20 cc's in it and we're off by 5 cc's. Where did that 5 go? And so someone has to go back and look for those missing dosages, which could be very, very difficult. I'm trying to have a solution or offer a solution for everything I say, and obviously this is a very multi dimensional kind of conversation. So all of the solutions aren't going to be perfect for every practice, but one thing that we can do to keep our drug balances logged correctly and hopefully discourage people from utilizing or misusing opioids from the lockbox with our pen and paper method that I think we're also used to, are the Pyxis or the Omnicell machines that we see in human hospitals. And they are a large investment, but they are a computed an automated way to get controlled substances under wraps in your hospital. Some of these machines require a fingerprint to log in or a secret password, and they timestamp date everything, which is really, really nice. And then they do the logging for you. The other thing that we see with at least staff diversion is injectables being less effective. Maybe we're noticing that some of the pain medications don't seem to be working as well as they used to, and that's because maybe somebody is diluting them out. I always think about when I was in high school and I was stealing alcohol from my parents, you know, taking some of the vodka out, adding some water in, and hoping nobody would notice. You know, it's the same kind of thing when it comes to these controlled substances. And what's interesting about that is there's been a little bit of talk, at least in the pharma world, where they are going to come up with formulations if sodium chloride or sterile water was added to it, it would change a different color, so that we can actually see if these things are being diluted or messed with, which I think is a really interesting, innovative way to kind of combat that problem. And one way, at least in my hospital, we've kind of addressed this concern or diversion, you know, if someone takes a syringe and we're concerned that they're switching out with saline or whatnot, one of the ways that we've actually tried to combat that is having a two-person witness. So we typically have two people that are signing out these controlled substances, and then we have a two-person treatment protocol. When we actually give these C2 drugs, we have a second person sign off that, yes, this person actually did administer this. Now, that can be a complete pain in the ass, especially in an emergency situation or a busy surgical practice. But when it comes to real concerns about opioid diversion, we need to think about the practice as well. You know, if we are knowingly allowing someone to utilize these drugs in our hospital, and even if there's a whisper or rumor going around, that sets up the whole hospital for liability and losing their DEA license, and then everyone would lose their job, right? So that's not fun, and it's difficult because we want to support our team members, and we understand that addiction is a disease, but we also need to protect the other staff members in the hospital. The other way that we can kind of assess efficacy of these drugs, or if we're concerned that these drugs are maybe being misused or diluted or whatnot, is that the real Elizabeth Warren? I just saw that name. Well, I guess it is the real Elizabeth Warren.
Everyone to turn your cameras on, folks. This is where it gets funny, is if you got your cameras on.
Exactly.
Because now we need to know, is that the real Elizabeth Warren?
Right. The other way we can kind of assess the efficacy of these products too is something that we should be doing anyway, is be putting pain scoring assessments for the vital sign checks that we're doing every 4, 6, 8, 12 hours, actually quantifying using one of these validated pain scoring systems to see if these drugs are being effective for the animal. So that's just something we should do in practice in general, and then also a way we can maybe alleviate some of our concerns if things are being diluted out. The other thing or sign that there may be some opioid diversion going on in the hospital is when we look at the log books and there's lots of wasted C2 drugs, which is going to be a concern. You know, if we have a particular person that keeps wasting some of these morphine, hydromorphone, ketamine, whatever type drugs, we need to know where those are going. You know, it's more often than not, we're squirting them in the sharps container, squirting it down the sink, or squirting it on kitty litter, doing whatever we're doing to get rid of them. But we need to have another person witness that, and we need to check trends to make sure a particular person isn't wasting more of these Schedule II drugs more often than not. And then the fourth topic, or the fourth sign, is a DVM, a veterinarian prescribing these drugs to themselves, or not necessarily themselves, but their own pet, or having a particularly friendly staff member that they are writing these prescriptions for. And often, at least from reports and veterinary medical board cases that I've seen and kind of researched, oftentimes these are things like hydrocodone or tramadol that we're seeing being scripted out to staff members or for their own pets, when maybe that's not necessarily appropriate. So again, establishing hospital policies where veterinarians don't get to write scripts for their own animals when it comes to controlled substances.
What?
And certainly having hospital policies, having drug policies for the staff. So a lot of hospitals already do have a no drug policy, right? And some hospitals will test before an employee comes in. But we should also have a policy in the hospital to be able to test that employee with suspicion if there seems to be a problem. And that's a whole uncomfortable conversation for the HR side of things to begin with. But it is a policy that I think practices really need to utilize to protect themselves and their other employees. Any questions so far? All right, cool. So the other...
I have one, Stephen,
Yeah.
I want to ask. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But I mean, so how, with all this going on, how important is it for a practice to have someone come in and test their security? I mean, is that becoming a thing in veterinary medicine?
Yeah, so there's a couple of consulting groups out there that I've seen, and one that comes up is Phil Siebert with Safety Vet. He comes in and checks out what you got going on and seeing if it meets industry, state, federal standards. So I think that's a great tool to utilize, absolutely. And certainly going back to like the Pixel and the Omnicell, when they come out and do an assessment or look at your practice for choosing the right type of machine, they kind of do that in their audit of the hospital anyway, which is really nice. So if you contact them and act interested, they'll come do a free audit for you, which is nice. And then when it comes to clients and concern about diversion, I think we're all pretty familiar with this, and I think we can all pick up the signs pretty quickly. So obviously, if they're going through their prescriptions really, really quick, we're like, what's happening here? Like, you know, you're supposed to give 3 of these a day, and this is supposed to last you, 5 days. This is lasting you 2.5 days. What's going on? And that is something that I see often, more often than not, out of all of these different little scenarios that I'm giving you. The other thing that might be a tip off for us is asking for narcotics specifically when we have plenty of other non-narcotic or less addictive pain management drugs to send home with clients. And then the third thing, and it is state dependent, but more states than not have these types of programs using an online database. If you're going to be scripting out Schedule II drug, we can check a database, typing in that owner's name, and looking and seeing if they have other outstanding prescriptions for that same pet or themselves at other practices. So in California, we have the Cures system. In Pennsylvania, they have the ARCO system where you can type in their name and it'll show you, hey, you have 3 prescriptions for hydrocodone at the same time. What's going on? And you do not have to give that client another prescription. And then 4 is your gut intuition. If you have this client coming in and it just seems off and they're asking for things, trust your gut intuition. And I think the nice safety net, at least in California, that we have built in now is when it comes to certain prescription drugs, we're not allowed to give more than 3 days worth, or we're not allowed to give more than 30 days worth of a different type of medication. So we have these built-in kind of catch nets, which are really, really nice for stopping those types of abuse issues. So, if we are going to send home an oral narcotic, send home only 3 days worth, and hopefully have a multimodal pain management protocol as well, so we don't have to lean on those opioids very much. There was one study that came out this January, in the Journal of American Medical Association's publication, and the title is Trends in Opioid Prescribing and Dispensing by Veterinarians in Pennsylvania. And what I thought was really interesting about this is they looked at one of the teaching hospitals in Pennsylvania, and their results found that despite the opioid crisis in 2018, we had a 41% increase in the overall morphine milligram equivalent of oral narcotics to pet owners, despite only having an increase in cases of 12.8%. So that does not match. And the most common drug that was scripted out was tramadol. And what's interesting about tramadol, for all the veterinarians and pharmacology whizzes out there, we know tramadol does not work in dogs very well. So why did we have this 41% increase in prescriptions with tramadol in particular? We had over 1 million tablets scripted out of tramadol from this particular hospital to dogs, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And their final result was these findings highlight an opportunity to assess the risk of veterinary opioid prescriptions to safeguard public health. And our trends, or our abuse of prescription power, is matching or surpassing what we were seeing in human medicine, which I think is really interesting. And again, because this is a human publication, this is not something that's being discussed in veterinary medicine, which is kind of alarming and scary.
I do have a question. So from the trends as it was coming about, I am curious, were the to your knowledge, were the trends in veterinary abuse equal to that of when the humans, or was it because they started realizing this was a portal that they could be utilizing it through? I'm just curious, was it an equal, or were we like a year behind? Do you know?
As far as matching the number of prescriptions for oral narcotics?
Well, just the fact that all of a sudden the abuse started taking place, that we started having more challenges. Did it start happening about the same time?
From what I've seen, I don't know the right answer to that at this point, just because they're starting to do these studies looking at veterinary medicine now. Mm-hmm. And historically, they only had data of substance abuse for veterinarians. They don't have a lot of data for veterinary technicians and assistants, even though there's lots of data for human nurses out there. So I can't give you a good solid answer on that, but they're looking at it retrospectively now and being like, oh crap, it's the same, if not more.
Yeah, give those statistics. That's really wickedly scary to really, wow. That's
very,
insane.
very scary.
That's very insane.
Numbers are bizarre. So we didn't mean to interrupt the flow there, Stephen. Carry on. Of course, have a drink.
That's a question I had.
No. So common signs for going back to the staff concern about diversion, common signs that we can see of opioid diversion with staff members includes absenteeism, particularly if they're showing up without calling, or using excessive sick days, frequent disappearing from the work site, or going to the restroom for long periods of time on shift, or improbable kind of excuses when they're coming back flustered and, coming in looking like their hair was all blown around like Brenda earlier. I'm just kidding. Unreliability in keeping appointments or their tasks or appointments that they're supposed to be seeing, an overall decrease in work performance, increase in accidents on and off the job, mistakes related to poor attention, or not being able to recall what they have recently done or what they've recently done in the past day or two, which is kind of tricky because I am just so overloaded. I do that just naturally. And then the other thing that we see is certainly confusion and difficulty concentrating, increases in the effort and time required for ordinary tasks, especially if they were kind of an exemplary employee before, interpersonal problems with other coworkers, and certainly shirking responsibility for errors or other oversights that they may have done that we can document. And then progressive deterioration in personal appearance and hygiene. That is something that I've seen a few times, and it's weird. I'm like, you just kind of look like a drug addict now, so I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Like, please get some help. I love you and I want to help you, but like also I want to protect my patients at the same time. And then physical signs, just as exhaustion, hyperactivity, dilated pupils, slurred speech, and whatnot. So those are just common things that we can see that can be attributed to abuse of narcotics in hospital.
So want to throw up the quick flag here. So we promised 25 minutes or so. We're at that mark. However, we always continue on beyond the 25 minutes because it seems like our conversations start really getting good as we get to that mark. So we do what we call the after party.
Sure.
So anybody who has to leave because of other commitments, thank you very much for being here. We hope you'll come back for another Bridge Club. And if you haven't joined already, think about joining this on a regular basis. If you'd love to stay, let's start the after party, continue the conversation, and do some Q&A too. So
And turn on your cameras because we'd love to see your faces. That is I know it's hard. I get it. It's the end of the day. But seriously, it does add a lot to the value. Plus, you know, we just don't want to look like we're the only ones like here. So one of the things that there's our beautiful Diane. So one of the things that I guess, you know, it's naiveness on my part, true naiveness, is I wasn't even thinking about the impact to the pets. I didn't even go in my brain that if someone is diluting a drug because they're taking it, what that means for the pet, what that means for the other pet owner, or the fact that they are taking the drugs away from their own pet. I guess I just didn't even go there. I was too busy of going, it's an opioid problem. Let's not get the diversion in there. Let's, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't even thinking. So for me, I've had a little bit of a eureka moment of, oh, good Lord, this is actually impacting the health and well-being of animals.
And it's tricky too, because, you know, I've managed and been on surgery services for years now, and it's not uncommon in a big, busy practice to draw up all of these these injectable narcotics in little pouches or little bags, and we hang them on the cage for ease, right? Like we want to be able to just go and grab the stuff and go. But that also sets us up for failure, and that the patient up for failure if there is diversion going on in the hospital, because that's super easy access. Like we've had two people legitimately log out these controlled drugs, but then we go and hang it where everyone can walk by, take it, switch it for saline, switch it for whatever. And then our patient suffers, which really, really sucks. And it's really sad, and you know, not to get on that pain soapbox again, but this is really nice when we have multimodal protocols. So if this is happening, at least they're getting something. And then the other tricky thing when it comes to like an HR side of things is if someone has declared at time of employment or during employment that they are a former drug addict, they do fall under the ADA of 1990. So they do fall under Americans with Disabilities Act. However, if they're drug tested and they test positive, that's all nullified. So then action can be taken against that person, but they are a protected class if they state that upon employment or during their time of employment. And again, that's just to stress having these drug testing policies as an employee.
yeah.
So when you say stated at some point, does that mean like one day they just go, yeah, I used to have that history, and then someone knows that they said it and it kind of protects them?
So I mean, technically, yes. Like, I mean, the person, if they felt bullied or vilified or whatever in the practice, and they have stated that, or they felt like they were being singled out, I don't know that the court case would go in their favor, but they could bring a case against you. So, you know, maybe it's something that we need to consider. Like when I was doing the research for this, we ask these questions on applications or letters of engagement. You know, do you have any disabilities? And we don't typically think of being a recovering alcoholic or a drug addict as a disability that someone would state. So maybe we do need to put that on there, on that form, just to remind ourselves, remind them that they are a protected class. But if they break it, you're screwed, and it's not gonna fall in your favor anymore.
I'm really surprised that practices don't have something in the employment application that requires you to disclose that.
Sure.
And again, we don't have a drug testing policy as a matter of course. I mean, it's interesting to me because you think from a protectionary perspective, that's really in the practice's best interest. And then, as Catherine said, you talk about the impact to the pets that you're treating if they're not getting the pain medication. So it's just not a debatable question, just an interesting, ponderable on my part, I guess, there.
It is.
So what do you do?
Yeah, it is. It is interesting too. It kind of ties into that whole licensing discussion as well, right? So the veterinarians, we know if they have any of these drug offenses or DUIs that they have to report. So that's easily checked and verified, right? If they have a history. In most states, especially if it's done through a non-certifying route, so like an LVT or an RVT, maybe not just necessarily a CVT route, they also have mandated reporting. And in particular in California, just because I'm from California, if you have a DUI or if you have a prior drug offense, like that is going to pop up on your license, or that may inhibit you from getting your license or being able to renew. So there are some checks and balances there, and it kind of goes into, maybe that is a standard that we need to have, is have for credentialed people being able to check that and being able to verify that. And then we also have a little bit of a conundrum in certain states, and California again being one of them, where you can have uncredentialed technicians get a controlled substance permit. So essentially you can have a person that is on the job trained, which is fine, but they can get a permit to handle controlled drugs and administer controlled drugs without technically having a lot of medical training or a degree behind it, or a certain credential. So it's a little bit tricky. We're kind of asking for it with some of the things. You can't walk into a human hospital, get trained on the job, and then go draw up controlled substances. Like that just doesn't happen. Like everyone that touches controlled substances has a license of some sort. And that's not the case in veterinary medicine. So holding ourselves to a higher standard at some point is definitely going to have to be part of the conversation.
So I know both Brenda and I have had questions, or anyone else, Clara, Rihanna, the three Elizabeths that we have on here tonight, Sarah, Diana, or Diane. Anyone have any comments or questions? I find this to be fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's such an interesting subject. And I hadn't thought about one of the things, Stephen, you and I were talking about when we met at NABC. And I'm just talking right now while you guys are thinking of your questions, because I know you have some. But it's just the whole idea of people harming pets in order to bring them in to get the pain medication for themselves. I mean, it just is stunning to me. And then thinking about the fact that as a veterinary practice employee, what you do about that. I mean, how do you know when to act and when to do something? What do you do?
Yeah. So I think we're all familiar with the syndrome, Munchausen-by-Proxy syndrome, for humans and their children. We see the same thing in animals, where people are harming their animals to get medications or attention for themselves, or that sympathy, whatever they're lacking. So that is a thing with animals as well, which is scary and terrifying, but a reality. I felt like there was something else I wanted to touch on. Oh, the other part of this conversation that we're going to start seeing that is really going to be inconvenient for us as veterinary professionals is we're going to start seeing drugs that aren't classically controlled become controlled because of this opioid crisis. So, tramadol is falling out of favor in a lot of practices. It is one of the more abused drugs that we have out there. What's interesting about tramadol is it's not a C2. I believe it's a C4 drug. And what's interesting about some of these other drugs that we have, like gabapentin, isn't controlled in a lot of states. I think maybe in Kansas or Kentucky, one of the K states, it is controlled, but in Michigan as well. Interesting. They're known as Johnnies on the street, and they potentiate and they enhance the effects of opioids. So opioid users are wanting to steal gabapentin so they don't have to use as much narcotics to get that same high, which is really interesting. So we are going to start to see drugs that aren't classically controlled become controlled, which is inconvenient and unfortunate that we put ourselves in that state.
And that increases cost for the hospital too, right? For the practice when you have to put higher levels of control.
It can. I mean, I think that the big thing here is becoming compliant. In veterinary medicine, you know, we have so many rules that are added on every single year, and it's really hard to keep track of which drugs are controlled now and which ones aren't, and how are we supposed to be doing dispensing. And, you know, California, we just enacted a new law where we have to give the owners the option to have a consult with a veterinarian or someone to discuss each and every single medication, the pharmacology, how it works, and whatnot. So it is hard to keep track of all of this stuff at the same time. So it's a mess. It is a And what's funny, I always make the joke of this, and it was funny when I was doing my letter of engagement with my new employer, which happens to be a cannabis company, a hemp company. In the letter of employment, they had the drug policy, and in that drug policy, they stated you could not use marijuana or cannabis products. And so I was like, you know, I am a recreational user and it's legal in your state and we are a cannabis company. Can we take that particular part out for cannabis specifically? Because that doesn't make sense. And they're like, oh my God, yeah, that makes complete sense. Let's take that out. I don't know where I was going with that, but I thought it was really funny.
No, but I think it's important. I think we have to be realistic about what we're demanding of the profession, but realizing the end use, right? So the same thing with the company you're going to work for. You have to be realistic about what's going on in the end use. But I think the word that keeps just coming out of my mouth is wow, just because I think I'm an educated person. I get it. I actually am the daughter of two folks that had really strong addictions. And so I'm aware of all that. But when it's one thing when you look at the human side and then when you compare it over, I'm just feeling a little naive tonight, but in a good way that I feel like you've opened my eyes. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and with that, here's just a fun fact. You know, people don't think about this in veterinary medicine either, and we're in a lot better control of it compared to the human side of things. I get the question from some owners, you know, like, do animals get addicted to opioids? And the answer is absolutely yes. Like, absolutely yes. And they're just like, I never thought that could happen. And so many veterinary professionals I tell that to, they're like, oh my God, I didn't think that can happen. And thankfully, you know, we have control of giving these medications to these animals, so we don't see that as often, but we know that they have that potential to become abusers as well. At least,
I'm looking at my dog like, just say no.
and at least in lab animal studies, we've even seen higher species, whether it's primates or even dogs and cats and even some rats, we'll see come downs, and we'll see manding behavior or fake behavior so that they get this narcotic reward, which is this is mind-boggling to me. And I think there's like even studies from the 60s and 70s where they're using hallucinogenics in like dolphins and other big developed animals and getting them addicted and watching the outcomes. So it is a thing. It is
fascinating. The whole subject, I think, is incredibly fascinating, and it's as you said, Catherine, it's frightening how big of an issue we're learning that it's become, and how it affects so many people. in veterinary practice. It just seems like such a shame that people who are trying to help animals in practice should have to deal with this as well. So we're coming up now on 7:41 Central Standard Time. So Catherine and I have a million questions. I'm sure we can fill up another hour asking these questions. Anybody else? We want to be cognizant of everyone's time and the fact that it is now the evening and we all deserve a little bit of free time in our life. So just want to be sure that there aren't any questions or areas you want Stephen to dig into a little bit more here. All right.
Glaring, good. Well, then I feel complete. So that's
There you go. Though I really do want to know what Elizabeth Warren looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Flash a picture, Elizabeth. Come on.
She just send us it.
Come on, Elizabeth. It's not
going to happen.
It's just your.
And it is interesting. We have a trio of Elizabeths, so it's kind of an Elizabeth kind of evening on the Bridge Club, I guess. So,
but I do encourage for the next time you guys come, you turn your cameras on, because it does make all the difference in the world. Because that's the whole purpose of us having the cameras, is because we are not a webinar. We're going to start a drink jar for any time anyone calls us a webinar. If this is your first time, also PowerPoints are banned. You will note that he didn't use a single PowerPoint because we don't do that. And the whole thing is to make a connection. So that's why we encourage it, and that's why we created what we did. So we get it. Sometimes people are, in places they can't be. We get it, but we do encourage it. So as much as
conversation, and I think we've had a really phenomenal one here tonight. So I mean, Stephen, thank you for bringing such great insight to the group. We really truly appreciate it, and for taking time to be a part of the Bridge Club this evening. To all of you for doing that as well. We see some really fun familiar faces, and for those of you who are brand new, we really hope that you'll choose to come back to another Bridge Club conversation again. And we do hope to have Stephen back as well, because there's a whole boatload of topics that I think we can have Stephen impart wisdom on. So we'll see if the new job allows him time to do that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So with that, all right, so with that, one final toast to all of you for being here with us on the Bridge Club tonight. We truly appreciate it. We appreciate your support, and we hope you have a fabulous opioid-free kind of evening.